Sharing speeches, chase extremes, drinking all the vodka in my way. Where's my dentures? It's prison time. Picking stocks is what I like to do. Trump is mad. Prison time. My friends are gonna be there too. Yeah, we're on the highway to jail. Highway to jail. We're on the highway to jail. Highway to jail.
Economic justice. This is a day of reckoning. Lace them up and lace them tight. The bedwetters, the liberals, the left, everybody, they're all over this. Stock market went down 1,700 points. We're all going to die. It's the end of the world. Really? Oh my God, the NASDAQ went down 6%. Sell off, die. You're all going to go. Sky is falling. Go in a bunker. This is all the nonsense that you're going to get from the gangster bankers on Wall Street that have run this country for the last 50 years and screwed the American worker. The exploitation of the U.S. worker has ended. Do you know that what they caused, what these Wall Streeters caused in 2008, stock market went down 50%. People were wiped out. You know what it went down yesterday? 2%. It went down 50%, and then they got bailed out. These are the people that I'm going to pay attention to, that have basically shipped your jobs overseas, scouring the earth for slave labor for 6 decades. No, I don't think so. Look, here's the bottom line of this thing. In one day, what President Trump did with a stroke of a pen, one man with courage, is he fixed 60 years of economic injustice for the American worker with one stroke of the pen in one day. So you better lace them up and lace them tight, because I'm telling you right now, the courage of President Trump is beyond the pale what he did here. He has given economic justice to millions of American workers who lost their jobs over the last 5 decades, whose towns got decimated. He gave them economic justice in one day. Under the Biden administration, our trade deficit in 2024 was $1.2 trillion. That's not sustainable. We've been getting screwed forever. And all these stocks that are down, you know who's down? The companies that are based on foreign cheap slave labor. That's what their margins are based on zero imports, while our workers and our factories here get screwed and go out of business. That is over. For decades, we have been screwed by these other countries. We've done nothing about it. No president has the courage to stand up to Wall Street, which made a ton of money. You got to remember, all these people do, all of Wall Street has gotten filthy yacht rich on the backs of the American worker, who they exploited to no end for 50 years. The reign of terror ended with that stroke of the pen on midnight. You look at these charts, and you find it online, you look at the tariffs, the tariffs, that we can't sell anything into these markets. You can't do it. 50, 60, 70%. We can't export anything. That's why we had a $1.2 trillion trade deficit. But worse, it eviscerated manufacturing, factories, jobs for Americans. And President Trump stopped that. In one day, President Trump gave us economic justice. This is a day of reckoning for Wall Street. It is a day that will live in infamy. One day, one man with the courage gave us 60 years back of economic justice. Thank you, President Donald J. Trump. In one day, President Trump
of having a child.
Yeah, well, I'm not the one who admitted they would be okay with killing babies in foster care and killing children that have been abused.
That's not the point. What I'm saying.
That's really.
You have a channel?
Yeah, we're doing some interviews today.
I love your skin tone too.
Thank you. Such a good vibe.
Of course.
Well, awesome. So we're asking people's opinion today on Planned Parenthood. Are you familiar with them?
Yes.
Okay. And do you know what they provide?
Yes. Abortions.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Safe abortions.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you know any other services that they provide?
I know, like, to teens, if you're under 18, you could get like birth control, condoms, counseling. They offer a lot of, beneficial things that the youth really should use right now.
Okay. So you have a pretty positive view of Planned Parenthood.
I mean, majority. I don't know. Is this like a yes or no? Am I wrong?
It's your opinion.
But yeah, that is definitely my opinion. I feel like, especially as teens, people get caught up in things that they really don't want to commit to for their entire lives. So if you get caught up with the wrong guy, you think you're in love, and then whoop, now you stuck. Not stuck, but you're stuck with a baby for the rest of this time, literally the rest of their lives and your life, if you're that kind of mother, because some women just don't have it in them and they abandon them and abuse them and all kind of shit. And it's like, girl, just get rid of it if you know you're gonna do that.
Get rid of them. Why not just give them to another family? That's good.
No, but exactly, even that, and that's another option that Planned Parenthood offers. So it's like, if you know that you are not the being who can provide for this child, then there are alternative options out there for you. So I definitely understand why people do abort children. Don't have babies that you don't want. Don't have babies that men are telling you in front of your face that they do not want. I wish them would stop doing that. Like it's like a plan to.
Why don't they just stop having sex with people they don't want to have a child with?
That too. To me, it's always pro-choice, your body, your life, because that baby is gonna be a baby.
It's a baby.
Yeah, and you're gonna have that baby
person.
forever. So
yeah. Well, do you know that Planned Parenthood gets nearly $700 million of our taxpayer money every year?
$700 million. I mean, honestly, I can't go against Planned Parenthood. I just can't. $700 million for how many single mothers?
Of our money. But they're not giving it to single mothers, though. Yeah.
I mean, if we're gonna just, single out where it is that our tax dollars go, then the police, respectfully.
So it's really interesting because since 2010, prenatal care has been down for 80% since 2010 at Planned Parenthood. Adoption referrals. So this is why this is research straight from their yearly report of 2022 to 2023, I believe it is. And so they're a 501c3. They have to tell us what they do every single year. So this is straight.
Which should be any union corporation. If we are paying tax dollars towards you, I need to know that you are doing the job and doing it correctly.
Right. But let me continue to tell you. So the STI testing and treatment down 15% since 2019. Client numbers down overall 34% since 2006.
Nobody has insurance. I don't have insurance.
Donors down 21%. Contraceptives down 44%. Breast screenings, manual breast exams down over 80%. And you mentioned adoption. They commit 228 abortions for every one adoption referral. So why are they getting so much more money yet all of their services are going down?
The services are going down because people are afraid. Women.
What are they afraid of?
Women don't know. They don't know what they're exposing their bodies to. A lot of people, especially behind abortion, there's a stigma.
But their abortions are going up. So they used to have this slogan where they said safe, legal, and rare. That's what we want. Safe, legal, and rare abortions, until it was exposed that a lot of these facilities were requiring abortion quotas. So the more abortions each facility did, the more praise that they would get. They would get awards. And so it's really interesting. That doesn't really make it seem like they want safe, legal, and rare abortions.
How many people can you think, or are you going to assume, would literally abandon their children with no repercussions from the state?
No, it's called Safe Haven Baby Boxes. We're at a fire station or hospital. You can leave your baby and the mother
thing. That John Denver's full of shit, man.
At the time of that movie, I didn't even know what that meant because I had no idea who John Denver was. And then I figured out it was about his song Rocky Mountain High. And then fast forward another 30 years, and I figured out that they like to tell us the truth in movies. And well, I think there's a little bit more to John Denver being full of shit, man, than what they're just saying about the Rockies. Let's look. John Denver was known for his love of nature and animals. You know who else loved nature and animals? This guy, Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter. Do you remember him? You know, this guy. Well, John Denver supposedly died in 1997, right around the time Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, the late 90s, got famous. And well, I don't even think I really have to say much to tell you they resemble each other an awful lot, don't they? And boy, would you imagine that? Their faces just happen to be extremely symmetrical. Let's say you just performed a little eye surgery and made your eyes a little bigger. It'd be a dead ringer, wouldn't it? And you know what is also funny? That John Denver had a wife, and well, she looked like that. And the crocodile hunter's wife looked like that. And what happens when you put them next to each other? Wow. Their wives almost look like they could be the same person as well. Would you imagine that? Well, I wonder if there's any sort of smoking gun that might give us more evidence. And although faded, I'd like to point out these 1, 2, 3 facial markings that seem to match up with 1, 2, 3 facial markings. And, who do they belong to? Oh, Steve Irwin and John Denver. Now, supposedly, Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, met his demise as well in 2006 when he was stung by a stingray. I wonder if there's anyone out there that looks like the two of them these days. Maybe he took on a new role. And if you don't think he's part of the club, well, you're just a silly Billy denying knucklehead. Because if they're on TV, they're part of the club. And I don't know how many times I have to tell people that. People are getting mad at me that I did a video on The Chosen, and they're saying if we can't trust The Chosen, the guys that play Jesus, and they're doing a video on Jesus, who can we trust? Not the people on TV, people. It's time to wake up and figure that out. The TV is indoctrinating you to make you worship these people on TV. Stop it. Stop it. Wake up. Stop worshiping the TV. It's brainwashing you. It's time to figure it out. But of course, all this is for entertainment purposes. I'm sure that they just look alike and have the exact same triangular dots on their face. And he died the same year that he became famous because of coincidence. That's all it ever is. Coincidence. I'm a satire account, entertainment only.
Deep within the walls of the FBI. It was for a time referred to as the laptop from hell. The device Joe Biden's son, Hunter, left at a repair shop and forgot about. The store's owner later giving it to the FBI.
You know who knew the laptop was real? Was the FBI.
The New York Post first reported on some of the laptop's contents, including his business deals with the Ukrainian energy company Burisma, in an October 2020 story that was for a time suppressed on Facebook and blocked on Twitter. Both companies later revealing they were told by government officials it was likely Russian disinformation.
They're just trying to make people think that there's some relationship to the Russians, when of course the FBI, better than anybody, knew that there wasn't.
Journalist Michael Schellenberger, along with Catherine Herridge, just shared a new batch of internal FBI messages suggesting an FBI employee was given a gag order by the Office of General Counsel, or OGC, and later told to backtrack. Another, that the FBI's Criminal Division, or CD, confirmed there was an active investigation into the laptop, asking, is it corruption, campaign finance? Later, oh crap, okay, it ends here.
It just underscores how many people knew that the laptop was authentic, that it showed potential crimes. Instead, they perpetuated the idea that it was part of Russian disinformation.
That notion bolstered by this statement, signed by 51 former intelligence officials, which said those emails purportedly belonging to Vice President Biden's son Hunter had, quote, all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation. As far as why we're learning this information now, well, top officials at the FBI, including Director Kash Patel, say they're committed to transparency, especially when it comes to the Biden family, and have hinted there will be more to come. I'm Christine Frizzell reporting.
About it. A senior FBI lawyer even issued a gag order on an agent to stop them from speaking out. So here to unpack all the latest revelations is Blaze Media senior politics editor Chris Bedford. So, Bedford, I mean, look at this update that we get today, right? How does this latest update make the Hunter Biden cover-up even more insidious? I didn't even know that that was going to be possible.
You know, but we always knew this is what was going on. Everyone in this room, everyone was watching, and we knew that this was crooked. We knew it was corrupt. We knew that top levels of the U.S. government and alumni of the intelligence community were involved. So what we're seeing now is actually unbelievably refreshing, because I covered this the whole time. And now we have the receipts. Now we have things we can insert into the history books. Now people will be able to look back in 50 years and say the entire thing was bogus. The corruption of the Biden family can start to begin to be exposed. How high the protection for them went can begin to be really exposed. And I remember that for the first couple of years I was covering this, whenever Maria Bartiromo or whoever else would say, well, are there going to be consequences? My answer would always be no. That's not really the way that DC seems to work for the left. There are never any consequences. But there's a new sheriff in town, one that I never expected in my lifetime to actually ever see. People who are interested, who are committed to, who are determined to hold people accountable, to make sure that there are firings, to make sure that pensions are taken away, to make sure that they're, when necessary, when crimes have been committed, that actually people are punished accordingly for their interference in civilian government. And it also draws into stark relief just how the party of democracy and promotion and norms. Remember when Joe Biden was elected, it was all about the return of civility, the return of norms. What a lie that whole thing was. And thank God it didn't really work. You could get all the fake historians of the last 50 years, John Meacham and all the other mealy-mouthed people, writing your speeches. The American people looked at it and said, this is stupid. This is bogus. We don't buy it. And now, in real time, you don't have to wait for like 75 years like you did with the Kennedy assassination. You don't have to wait for another 20 years like we probably will have to do with Watergate to get the receipts and learn how presidents were undermined, how mistakes were made, and how our federal government is out of control in real time. And the Hunter Biden laptop story, way bigger than Hunter Biden himself, way bigger than the presidential family corruption itself, was how the entire economy came together to stop it. Remember, it was the Hunter Biden laptop story, even more than the reaction to January 6th, that really rang the death bell for a period of time. It seems like not forever, hopefully not forever, on the American dream. And I don't say that lightly. The idea that if you don't like something, you can build it yourself. If you don't like the way that Facebook moderates content, and Twitter moderates content, and Google moderates content, then you can build it yourself. Well, the Hunter Biden laptop story proved that to be completely false. Not only were they willing to suppress this in time for an election, but then in the months afterwards, Amazon Web Services was willing to rip out the actual serving, the internet servers beneath American companies that had done nothing wrong because they were going along with this disinformation. This whole thing exposed just how corrupt the federal government was, the intelligence services were, the people who protect them were, and the corporate interests that guarded them, that have now come around and are kissing the ring and being friendly and being polite. But you never forget what they did to the people, what they did to the elected representatives for this government, what they did to elect Joe Biden. And just don't use that for vindication always, for going around just for retribution, but use it for building a system that is better and making sure that never happens again.
Do not buy new windows if you live in Michigan. Americans living in zip codes, starting with 48 and 49, are being paid to switch to energy-efficient windows through the Michigan Home Window Replacement Program.
Gosh, Chris, I hope you're right about the justice because, look, I have every reason to think that Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, these are people who are actively going after it. They know where the bodies are buried ever. They were aware of a lot of this stuff as it happened, even from the outside. So I hope that happens because what always happens is you sit in that seat and all of a sudden you think, well, I have to worry about the institution, right? This is what a good person tells themselves. I'm concerned about the reputation of this institution. And in the past, that has been used as an excuse not to fully root it out. But in this case, you have no choice because we don't trust the FBI at all. And this is why. Could you go into a little bit more about the particulars of what's coming out? I mean, there's a lot here, but I think we've kind of glossed over that. Talk a little bit more about what this means that the FBI is gagging its own employees.
So when this story first came out, it was the first time that Facebook, which previously had hid behind this independent network of fact checkers, they called it, run very closely by Poynter Institute, which is left wing, and really responsive to the feelings of a lot of other left-wing institutions and the credentialing institutions, had decided we're allowed to be fact checkers. Facebook had always hidden behind them and decided that they weren't going to make any kind of a marketing decision or any kind of a content decision on the validity of what was coming out. When the Hunter Biden laptop story came out, they changed it. This was too big for them. They decided that regardless of fact checks, they were going to ban the sharing of this content and what was at that point, at that time, one of the biggest sources of news for Americans, including American voters, that was around. People, much less so than reading newspapers, as we know now, or watching cable news, or tuning in even here, were getting their news through Facebook. So when Facebook turns that off, it changes everything. And you saw Good Morning America, you saw all the morning shows in general completely ignore the story. I think some of them gave maybe 45 seconds to a minute and a half, the entire election cycle, to the story. Facebook said the fact checks will come. Now we've learned that FBI analysts immediately reached out and said, we've actually confirmed that this is authentic. This is not disinformation. This is not a deep fake. We don't know exactly where it has come from or how it's been exposed at this point, but we can confirm its legitimacy as Hunter Biden's laptop. And you might remember that fact check that Facebook promised was going to come and justify its actions never came. There's nothing, not even from the hacks over at USA Today or Poynter Institute or the Google School of Journalism, whatever they set up, was ever able to come up with a fact check that showed that the Hunter Biden laptop was disinformation. And now we know that the FBI knew that from the very beginning, and that senior members of the FBI clamped down, put a gag order on the analysts who'd been in touch with the tech companies, because the FBI was in close hand-in-glove touch with the tech companies to suppress disinformation, as they called it, which is really a way of waging war, information war on the American people. They put that gag order on. You had top people, top alumni from the American intelligence services signing on to public letters saying that this is fraudulent, this is dangerous. You had the campaign having to answer for this. And this kind of corruption is the sort of thing that actually would have changed votes. This is the kind of corruption that would have exposed what Donald Trump's saying was true. And it's not just the corruption of the Biden family, who was making money off of foreign adversaries, who was making money using the office of the vice presidency, who were acting extremely loose with their legal judgments. Because remember, at that point, Joe Biden hadn't been, when this was going on, when this crime was going on, Joe Biden at that point had not been selected to be the presidential nominee. He was advanced in age. Hillary Clinton was supposed to be president for 8 years. The Bidens never expected to see public scrutiny at this level again. So they decided they were going to go all in on making money, and they didn't care how they were going to do it. He was going to put his son on the airplane. It didn't matter which Chinese businessman, which Ukrainian businessman they were going to meet with. It wasn't a concern to him that the Chinese had a key to his office where he was supposedly working out of, Joe Biden himself, because he was never going to be in the public eye again. Well, all that changed, and all that came out, and the tech companies, in conjunction with the media and in connection with the FBI and the intelligence services, did everything they could to suppress that, including, we've now learned, shutting up what they knew from the very beginning, which is that this material was authentic.
Well, Bedford, great stuff as always. And Chris, it's good to see you back in a suit and tie. Business Bedford is back. Sweater Bedford was a one-day thing.
Yeah, it's a terrible aberration, but I even shaved. It was wonderful. It feels good. I'm back to normal. When I went to the studios this morning, I was recognized.
There you go. They know business Bedford. He has a reputation there in Washington, D.C. that we're happy that you uphold that, because somebody has to make D.C. look good. The swamp.
Trump's tariffs. So what the hell is going on? Well, you see, yesterday Trump's promised 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico and 10% on China officially kicked in. What that means is that any goods sent from these countries to the United States will now cost companies 25% more, or 10% in China's case. So for example, if a Canadian business sent a car to the US that cost $50,000, today US companies will pay a $12,500 tariff at the border. So the price of your once $50,000 car is now actually $62,500. Why would Trump purposefully make things more expensive for Americans? Well, two main reasons. The first is more of a longer-term, unguaranteed benefit, but it would be to change consumer habits to buy more American-made products and incentivize more international companies to manufacture in the US. In theory, that means a stronger US economy, more stable jobs, and less dependence on foreign countries. The second reason for imposing these tariffs would be to use them as a tool to pressure Canada, Mexico, and China into doing what Trump wants. Some of these things that he's publicly mentioned include renegotiating trade deals, stopping illegal immigration, and the flow of fentanyl. There's also the far-fetched idea of Canada becoming a state of America. But here's where things get interesting, because instead of just doing what Trump wants, Canada has clapped back with a 25% tariff of their own, and Mexico said they're doing the same but haven't announced the percentage yet. China reacted a little differently by preparing to file a lawsuit with the World Trade Organization. So why is Trump not backing down? Just listen to this. In 2023, Canada sent 76% of all of their exports to the United States. That accounts for roughly 19% of their entire GDP. In 2024, Mexico sent 78% of all of their exports to the United States. That makes up 37% of their entire GDP. But for America, their exports to both countries combined only make up roughly 2.7% of their entire GDP. So simply put, even if they do retaliate, getting into a tariff war with the United States would hit Canada and Mexico much harder. Trump knows this, and he's using it.
The rich are punishing Trump for siding with the neglected and humiliated American working class over them. And yet when somebody has the courage to show up and say to Wall Street, screw you, I am waging war, I'm waging class warfare on behalf of the American working class, and you elites in Wall Street, you do what you need to do because I'm not going to stop fighting for the American working class. Suddenly, everybody is sitting around going, oh no, the stock market. Yeah, the stock market looks like that because the rich are punishing Trump for siding with the neglected and humiliated American working class over them. We all agree that it is deeply unfair for the American middle class to be bearing the burden of unfair tariffs from other countries. We have already seen these tariffs work, Pierce. We have already seen $1.2 trillion in manufacturing invested in this country since January 21st. So they have already worked. Now, how long is Wall Street going to keep trying to punish this president for standing the American working class? I don't know, but I can tell you that the view from the street is people cannot believe that there is a president who is working for them, who is putting them first and telling Wall Street to go screw itself. Wall Street, which picked the Democrats for the last 3 election cycles in a row. That's what the real story is here.
But when you give up your manhood, I've never seen somebody recover from it. That was all the people that went to the puffy parties. That was all the people that did all those things thinking that there was never going to be a consequence for what they were doing. Got punked out and pimped out by some greater desire. You shouldn't have a greater desire than being a man. So I believe that's a big problem with a lot of the actors out there because they get fluid. And next thing you know, once you go fluid, it's gone. You don't have any foundation to pull yourself back from. So maintain your man card, no matter what.
Man, I mean, you know, one of the things you're seeing, you went to a whole different place.
Sorry.
No, I get it. So you see some guys struggling with that. You see Bieber struggling with that. You see some of these guys struggling with that.
They can't get it out of their head. They can't get it out of their head. The things that they did, no matter how they did it, whether they were drunk or high or whatever, you gave up your man card. You need therapy. And that's the thing that hurts them the most. And so they end up on drugs, end up every way to try and get rid of any principles there are. And that's what the business does. And the women that trade their bodies to go and get the role, they get to the point where they have their Oscar, they have their money, but they don't have their dream. They don't have the soul that they started with. So it's like achieving don't mean anything. If I get all the Nobel Prizes from doing all of this, but in the process I have to trade out all of my integrity to do it so that they can stay in place, what benefit is that if I lose my integrity? You got to go in as a principal. And what we were brought in here as men. We produce 1,500 sperm per heartbeat for a reason, because the aggression is necessary. You don't trade that in, no matter what.
Did you ever have the opportunity where you got invited and you said no to it?
Hell yeah.
What was the consequences when you said no?
Puffy invited me for weeks, asking me to come and teach him how to, wanted me to be his acting coach for a while. Go there and he's sitting around just looking. I'm like, okay, what's the material you want to work on? He's just looking at me. Then next thing you know, okay, hey, will you help me? I want to hear your music. So I come over there and I play the music, and he's sitting there just looking at me, like waiting. Okay. So then my assistant was like, he wants to hang out with you next week. And I was like, for what? He's like, I think he's trying to fuck you. That's what my assistant said. And I was like, oh, okay. Now I get it. So now no more communication. Now you know to be hands off with somebody. A number of producers come in and make the approach, and you threaten to punch them in the mouth, or threaten to knock their head off for talking to you or looking at you like you're a woman. When you approach a real man about his masculinity, you're going to get a real reaction back. It's a difference when a guy walks in a room and when a man walks into a room. And a man don't take the same things that a guy will accept. So always be the man in the room. And that's always been my whole thing. And have lost businesses because I don't bend over in that way. I don't compromise. I don't play gay roles. I don't kiss a man. I don't do that shit because the man card means everything.
To in Iowa was where I was raised. You could be talking about escaped goat.
That's right. It could be a thing.
It could, like the fence breaks, a goat gets out. Goats
You've got to go get it. You've got to track it down.
Animals. That's right.
In the same way,
animals, they can climb, they can jump.
Yeah, cross-eyed bear. It's he's got troubles. A cross-eyed bear is a problem. It's walking through the woods. It's hitting trees. It doesn't have depth perception. Like there's all kinds of issues that go along with that.
Are you ready for this one?
I'm ready.
Let's talk about the goat of internet censorship, Elvis Chan.
He's kind of a goat, yeah.
And he's an escaped goat who was able to, I guess, not get fired. Obviously, you've been popping off. You and Garrett have been popping off about this. I don't know if you know Elvis Chan or if you've ever worked with him. And the senator did get a fact incorrect. He said that he was just like a low-level FBI. No, he was a special agent in charge, to my understanding.
He was an ASAC, actually.
And he got promoted. And so I want to dive into this with you. But I wanted to just like start off the top and say, when your time at the Bureau, like, were you aware of any like open internet censorship that was going on?
No. So this came out of San Francisco. This was a program that was referred to as Bronze Griffin, which people may have that and they go like, oh yeah, I kind of heard about this. If you were paying attention to the Twitter files drops, which I was riveted by when they happened, we found out that there was this thing that you hear Taibbi talk about, you hear Schellenberger talk about it. They did it in testimony. They referred to it as I think a censorship industrial complex. And I would actually broaden it because it's not just censorship, it's an information industrial complex. So we've got a military industrial complex. Those are senior level military leaders. They get hired on to industries after the fact. They get hired on not because they know the most about fighter jets, right? They just know the guy who signed the next check for the next fighter jet. And that turns out to be really lucrative. We saw guys like James Baker, who were the former attorneys working in the Office of General Counsel for the FBI. They go get hired on by Twitter because the FBI is an intelligence agency and it deals in information. It doesn't deal in fighter jets. It deals in info. That's what intelligence agencies do. So what we saw was this departure and this sort of interplay with people who were working for the Bureau in the intelligence sphere and then going to the place where intelligence lives in the private sector. And that is Google or Meta or any of the other sort of major tech companies. And Twitter was one of them at the time, now X. All of these places are places where information resides at a level and a bulk collection that the government would be jealous of. And so they want to make sure they have those inroads. One of the things Taibbi talked about was a quote unquote belly button, which is the interface. It's the navel that connects a mother to a baby, but it also connects two places with this back and forth exchange, right? Waste out and nutrients in. That's the umbilical cord. So having that belly button connection was saying the FBI was the front person because they're a legitimate law enforcement agency too. They have like a cover for action to go out there and interface with all these businesses. And they do so under various programs. There's a thing called InfraGard. There are two different offices that fall underneath the director that involve interface with the private sector. And those are basically two things. They allow the FBI to maintain legitimacy and kind of leverage. We saw kind of a carrot and stick situation. Like, we'd really like you to do this. And then the alternative is if you don't, there's going to be this penalty regulation coming in from Congress. Mark Warner was famous for saying these things. They were like kind of holding it over the head of big tech, and regulation equals expense. So they don't want that. And then the second piece of it was they were like, also, we'd like to get our people into jobs after the fact. So let's just go ahead and send them out there. Let's put these people into positions so they're going to be empathetic. Can I drop something that's not currently public with you right now? I found it.
Please.
The stuff you were showing earlier. This is the Catherine Herridge, and this is Schellenberger's documents. They were showing those text messages. If you guys want to throw them on the screen, you can.
Please.
A lot of it was redacted, right? And one of the things that they showed a redaction of, if you'll scroll over, it says OGC AGC. That is the Office of General Counsel, Assistant General Counsel.
Yep, right there at the top.
Now, in this case, and there's multiple instances of it in the various different slides that they had. And the fun thing about that is that person was a very specific person working under national security. That person's name is Matt Perry. I asked somebody in the Office of General Counsel about it and said, can you give me a historical on the timeline there and what this guy was doing? And he went from Washington, D.C., where he spent most of his career. And now he lives, you're going to be shocked to hear, in San Francisco, where Elvis Chan cut his teeth as the ASAC, the Assistant Special Agent in Charge, working Bronze Griffin, working with the tech agencies, and he works for Microsoft now, which is the exact same protocol that we saw James Baker do. This pipeline of FBI attorneys directly over to working for big tech companies, it's undefeated. It's Mike Benz's blob. It is the thing that continues to go on. It's intelligence that exists both in private and in public sector, and they work together for the same ends, which are antithetical to liberty.
So the guy who was responsible for rigging the 2020 election, or at the very least was excited to do so by censoring conservatives, trying to destroy our site, trying to destroy our show, trying to destroy the young creators on our team who've worked with me for a decade or more, those guys got rewarded.
Yeah. That's how it always works. They get to retire with a pension. They get to go over there and take a new job that pays them a bunch more money for services rendered. And thanks you for being part of the team. And also, by the way, their names are never made public. They're redacted by the FBI. Right. Why? That guy's not an FBI employee. He was an attorney. He didn't work like super sensitive cartel operations. I've got buddies that have gone and put cartel members in jail and get credible threats by people who actually cut off heads that they say, hey, these people are going to come after you. You've disrupted this prison gang and they've put bodies in the ground. And what do? Do we move them and redact their name from all the public documents? No, we just give them a little bit more security for a little while. Sometimes the FBI pays for cameras or something. It's just not that much, because there's a risk that you assume when you decide to go and raise your hand and swear allegiance to the Constitution and say you're going to do an honest job. And by the way, that guy's not a law enforcement officer, and he never was. He never swore the same kind of oath. He didn't carry a badge and a gun. So this is the problem with putting non-FBI agents into places. And Elvis Chan is another example of someone who is an FBI agent, but he's an intel guy. And so what he does is his allegiance is to information and intelligence, not to criminal investigations or legal criminal process.
So look at
We're running an important poll to see who is supporting Donald Trump. And as a thank you for participating, we're offering any Patriot.
This clown, that grin on his face and that inexplicable hairline. And he's
what kind of belt do you think he holds in BJJ, if you were going to guess?
Of my pay grade. Elvis Chan on securing the 2020 election. What's to stop them from doing it again is my question to you, Kyle, because we saw obviously the Blinken letter to Michael Hayden. We saw Michael Hayden getting all the CIA directors on board. We've seen the emails now. We've seen how the op worked. We've seen the dirt, the muscle come through and the threatenings and the deplatformings. We've seen the op at play. What's to stop them from doing this in 2028? If everybody just gets rewarded, Kyle, if everyone who's a part of this gets a pat on the back and a golden star to pin on their chest and a plum job at Microsoft, paid half in stock, then what's to stop them from pulling this operation again?
The short answer is nothing, shy of an FBI that goes out there and gets some transparency and gets some accountability. And those are the things we talked about the last time you and I spoke. They need to be done. The senator said the same thing. There is an advantage of having them working for the Bureau. You can actually compel testimony. You do what's called a Kalkine's warning. This is a very specific procedure for federal employees. You can get dragged into an internal investigation, and they have two options. They can give you a Garrity warning, which means you don't have to incriminate yourself and you don't really have to talk to us, like what you're saying is voluntary. Or they can give you a Kalkine's warning, which says we're not going to hold you criminally liable, but we might take your job if you violated the terms of your employment. But we do need you to answer this, or it will be insubordination and you will be removed. And so you do have some tools that you could leverage. Was Elvis Chan the only guy running this op? Was he the highest level? Probably not. But I do know that he was out there talking to CEOs. He was the front man of it. And he wasn't a low-level person. He was a GS-15, which maxes out the government scale. He's a second-line supervisor and answerable only to the special agent in charge, which he's now been promoted to, from what I hear. So at the end of the day, he was a senior person in the FBI. No question about that. Those people are referred to as executives and front office and a bunch of other nonsense. So they have a lot of ability to operate with a wide latitude. So he's not nobody. Okay. And under any circumstances. And I had people that were on conference calls. Here's the fun thing. They have evidence of this at the FBI. If they were so inclined, guys like Kash Patel, people like Dan Bongino sitting in there right now, who've talked about some of this corruption, who know these stories inside and out because they've been covering them the same way you and I have. They can walk out there and do something about this. There are videos that were shown around the country to various members of the FBI. And you know how government works. If they put it on video, they also recorded it. It goes into the archive. They don't ever lose any of this stuff. Storage is cheap. And they were broadcast with Elvis Chan specifically. I know he was talking to the CEO of Reddit, whose name I don't know off the top of my head, but was talking to the CEO of Reddit. This is in a post-laptop era, but Biden administration. And this is when FBI whistleblowers were starting to come forward to weaponization. And I had a whistleblower come to me and say, listen, here's the problem. He stood in front of an entire audience locally and then also across the country, which was videotaped, and it was like available through the secure net. And he said, kind of a wink and a nod, like, we can't enforce your terms of service, but we certainly could call people out. And if you wanted to block people, ban people, censor people because they violated your terms of service after we use the investigative resources of the FBI, the American federal government's going to lean on a private company and tell you who violated your terms of service. You know, you could always get rid of them. And it was a wink and a nod, and everybody kind of chuckled and said, yeah, that's what we can do. And that's what they actually did. That's what the Twitter files proved. That's what people on your team and others have actually experienced. This is not like not a victimless crime. This is something that cost people their livelihood. There was a lot of money. And of course, an election was in play, which they're claiming, it was the only thing. There were a lot of things at play during that time, but an FBI weighing in on any side, didn't they weren't they accused of rigging something that happened with Hillary Clinton as well? They were all like, everybody was up in arms about it. I just think they thought it was going to go the other way when they sort of like let her go with it. Dropping that quote unquote bombshell by saying they weren't going to prosecute her was a big deal. It could have gone just as likely the other way, where Americans were like, well, the FBI said that she's good, so she can be president.
Okay, so quickly, this gets to my point. Like, they did it with Hillary Clinton, and nobody suffered any consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody went to prison, right? Some people lost their jobs. Maybe they like it better outside. I don't know. But like, it didn't matter. They all got CNN gigs. They all got MSNBC gigs. No one suffered. And so why not run it again? And they ran the exact same op with just different shades in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
So what should happen, Kyle? Like, if you were in charge of this, what would you advise? Like, what should happen to ensure that it doesn't happen again? I don't have to do this show in 2028, brother.
Well, we're probably going to do it. Let's be real, because that's just the nature of the status quo is basically undefeated in this country right now. But let's say what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Let's say mutually assured destruction was a pretty good situation. It worked pretty well in the 80s. We never went to nuclear war with Russia. We never went to, with the USSR. We lost one of the great Cold Warriors, Val Kilmer, aka Iceman, right? Just lost him overnight. One of my favorite people of all time. Reminds me, mutually assured destruction was, if you attack me, then you get attacked in equal and opposite kind. They went after Donald Trump with 18 USC 241, conspiracy against rights. And that was supposedly because he defrauded the American people of their right to be able to elect the president and select. And this was January 6th nonsense. That's what they went with. Conspiracy against rights. It's very broad. Conspiracy means it didn't even have to happen, by the way. It just means that you planned for it to happen and you had an executable plan. And so the discussion of that plan is enough. Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, the director's advisory team, the folks that are working inside the Bureau right now have the ability to query these comms. They can find the conspiracy. Those are criminal charges under 18 USC. They could actually go after. And it's not the first time that somebody who's worked for the FBI has been indicted for criminal conspiracy or has done something criminal. Generally speaking, the biggest reason to get removed from the FBI is when you embarrass the FBI. And what is more embarrassing than weighing in on not one, but two different presidential elections and having people run an op against the guy who's currently the sitting president? And as you mentioned, 20% approval rating for the other team right now. Democrats lean into the 20 when there's an 80-20 issue. They go and find the fringe minority and they own it. They wear it. They put the skin on like it's their own. Okay, fine. You get to own that. Let's go ahead and prosecute some people that have done some things wrong. And then you can get all the people that were crying about defund the police and saying that the cops are the bad guys. Okay, sure, there are some people that are bad. I heard Kash Patel say, let good cops be good cops. Do you know who was standing behind him when he had that press conference? Stanley Meador.
A very bad cop.
Okay, the guy who actually was the special agent in charge in Richmond when they went out and published that radical traditionalist Catholics were potentially close to white supremacists and likely to be recruited by white supremacists to do God knows what. The same guy that was the final straw on whether or not that got approved was standing behind him during the good cops discussion, because that guy also got promoted. And you know who hasn't been promoted because he's still suspended forever is my friend Garrett O'Boyle. He's gone 30 plus months without a paycheck for telling people about real corruption like this and talking about, hey, here's the cases where FBI agents were investigating parents at school board meetings. And these are the specific parents, because when I released the first piece of it and I went to weaponization and said, look, they've introduced this threat tag and now the FBI is actually saying they're going to use counterterrorism resources on parents. That's pretty bad. The question is, did they actually do it? And Garrett O'Boyle was part two. He was the second punch in that, where he went to Jim Jordan's committee and said, not only did they release a threat tag saying they were going to do it, here's the actual parents' names whose rights were violated. And here's the people who were actually going to be the victims of that lie that the attorney general was involved in. You mentioned Merrick Garland earlier. He was the source of all this, but all this stuff actually comes to a slightly lower level of corruption. People like Lisa Monaco, people like Lee Loftus, who are the number twos sitting in the DOJ that actually run the DOJ historically. Like, you know, the attorney general is kind of a figurehead. They give you like broad policy, but they're not actually managing specific offices. And so a lot of this stuff got carried out by people who are legitimately what we call deep state. They're administrative state. They're people that have been there for 20 or 30 years. They always get to retire. They never end up going and paying for any of this stuff. Their names are never publicized when the Office of General Counsel says, by the way, we had a finding of wrongdoing from 3 years ago, and these are all the things they did. They did this and they did this and all this, and here's the case for it. And we've also sort of concluded that this is true based on the burden of proof that we have. But that person has retired, so we have no options. We referred it to FBI and DOJ has decided not to prosecute their own people because they went and they work in the private sector. The same lady who removed me, she works for General Electric. She has a job in aviation as a chief security person. And she removed a bunch of Christians specifically for saying they didn't want to get the vaccine shots and said, we have a sincerely held belief against this. And she said, well, we're going to pull your security clearance because you are not loyal to our regime. And you have some personal guidelines because we don't agree with the way you think. They did a straight up purge in the FBI. You heard Jim Jordan say this for the last couple of years. That's not fake talk. That's not just like someone being hyperbolic because they're in Congress and running for office. They legitimately purged dissent. So there were two types of people. The people who said, I don't think this is right and I'm going to highlight myself, you get removed. And the people who saw those people get removed and go, man, I still got a paycheck and the stuff I'm doing is not directly doing any criminality. I'm going to keep doing my job and shut my mouth. And so people have learned the exact wrong lesson. And unless we have accountability where some people pay and some people are made whole, which is a really big thing. If some people are not made whole and corrected, I actually got Schellenberger yesterday with my April Fool's tweet. Like I posted that Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend were reinstated with full back pay and benefits, and they've been promoted. And I got Miranda Devine. We got Alan Fuhr at the New York Times. So it goes to both sides, both in New York. We had Schellenberger, Project Veritas, various other people going like, yeah, congratulations. And it's like, yeah, that was a joke because it's April Fool's. That should have totally happened. That's why it was plausible. And that tells you exactly where America's at right now. The wrong people got promoted. The right people are still waiting for justice. We can't have that.
I'll tell you, we will clip this, we will tweet it, we'll tag Cash, and we'll send it, man.
I've already press tested this for them. You know what I mean?
Amazing. Like there's a feedback loop now that is getting really tight, and it's important, and it really does come from the people who are victims here. And I would never classify myself as a victim, but Kyle, like if there are people who have been victimized by this, and this goblin straight up like tried to take us offline, tried to destroy our show and my company. Sure. And this was the intended result, was to demonetize and then deplatform. And so this is an existential threat to me, my family, the people who work for me, who are my family, who work with me. So yeah, like a dog with a bone, man, we're going in. Kyle, we got to jump, dude. You're the man. Thank you so much for always shedding so much institutional light on everything. And also for bringing up Val Kilmer, who is a legend, and who is the Iceman. And, yeah, it's sad to see it, man. It's sad to see him go. I mean, he only had 10 minutes of screen time in Top Gun, and he's the most memorable. Give me another Top Gun. No, I don't want to see the Batman one.
No, show me the bite.
There you go. Thank you. Yeah,
there it is.
That's right.
The bite, the chomp, the gum chomp.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Taking a bite out of crime. Kyle Seraphin. Everybody go follow Kyle. And obviously, he's a excellent source of information on this. 200,000 people already follow Kyle Seraphin. Get in there. Truly brave man. Thank you, Kyle.
Thanks, Benny.
to the Czech Republic for a week so that they could spend more time working on American rule of law issues together.
John Roberts is not corrupt. I know the Chief Justice well. He stayed when I was ambassador, stayed under my roof, came and spent a week with us. We worked on American and European rule of law issues together.
Did you hear that? John Roberts, while Norm Eisen was the U.S. ambassador to the Czech Republic, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, yes, that John Roberts stayed under Norm Eisen's roof, stayed with him for a week as Norm Eisen and Chief Justice John Roberts rigged the judicial system in Europe, worked on European rule of law issues. Now, again, rule of law is their weasel word phrase for saying it's not a rule of kings where, no one is above the law. So the law has rule. The law rules over you, not man, not a king, not a president. It's all about the law controls all. So if you control the law, if law rules all, and then you have these programs like this John Roberts, Norm Eisen program in the Czech Republic to control the law, then you control everything. So having a program, a rule of law program, sometimes will be called governance programs or anti-corruption programs, but they're all about control over the judges, the prosecutors, the courts, the law schools. So this is what we're running into right now with all these district court judges who are nullifying everything Trump does, blocking him from shutting down agencies, blocking him from firing people. This is what it looks like when you've got these rule of law programs in a foreign country and they try to change their laws or they try to clean up their country. And I actually want to get into some of these documents in a bit here. But now, Norm Eisen lived in a very peculiar place in the Czech Republic. He had a special house. There you go. Prague Palace. Norm Eisen with the former president of the Czech Republic in October 2011. The last palace in the next battle. Norm Eisen tells the epic story of democracy's long victory in Europe through a house's history. 7 years ago, as the new U.S. ambassador to the Czech Republic, again, head of the State Department for all things Czech Republic, Norm Eisen moved into one of Prague's most beautiful homes, a 150-plus room Beaux-Arts mansion with a sweeping curved facade. He soon heard fascinating tales about its previous residents. A German general, one of Czechoslovakia's richest men. Okay, so he stayed in a 150-plus room mansion. So when he goes on and he says,
I know the Chief Justice well.
I know the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, well.
He stayed when I was ambassador, stayed under my roof.
He stayed under my roof. So he stayed in Norm Eisen's 150-room mansion.
Came and spent a week with us. We worked on...
He came and spent a week with us. We worked on...
American and European rule of law issues together.
We worked on American and European rule of law issues. I want to know what exact issues they worked on. What issues, what American and European rule of law issues did Norm Eisen and John Roberts, staying at Norm Eisen's house, work on for a week? Was it rule of law issues in Romania, in France, obviously in the Czech Republic? Because if you remember, Norm Eisen was effectively doing this like regime change operation through arresting all of the political opponents. But he said American and European rule of law issues. I want every single one of these rule of law programs completely declassified. This is one of my side quests right now.
Hey everybody, Jeremy Harrell here, LFA TV. Do you really want to know why the stock market looks like and is crashing right now? There's two reasons. Number one, this is Wall Street and the rich elite punishing President Trump because President Trump has refused to back down off standing up for the American people and the American middle class. And you're going to hear all the elite and all of the media cry that we're losing trillions of dollars in the stock market. Nike's losing billions of dollars, and these massive child slave companies are losing billions of dollars in worth. Oh, cry me a river. Let's not talk about the trillions of dollars that President Trump has secured in manufacturing investment into our country, which is the middle class getting beefed up and getting jobs, not the ultra rich that are controlling the fears in the stock market right now. Now, the ultra rich will do this for a news cycle in order to drag President Trump's name through the mud. But sooner or later, it'll all turn around and they'll start reaping the rewards of President Trump's economy and President Trump's tariffs and President Trump's deals with other countries and companies to invest trillions of dollars into our country so that we can beef up our manufacturing and American-made products. That's what you're seeing right now. Wall Street, which literally has chosen the last 3 or 4 Democratic presidents. That tells you right there who is for the people and who's not. The ultra rich and the ultra liberal Wall Street billionaires are punishing President Trump through the news media and in the stock market to make it look like everything is bad. But President Trump, stand your ground. Stand your ground. Because while they're talking about the trillions that these child slave billion-dollar Forbes companies are losing, they're not talking about the trillions of dollars that are being invested right here in America for the working class people. We voted for this. Continue to do it, President Trump. Stand strong. We're with you. Everything will be turned around within just a couple months, and they can eat their words then.
And what's taking place when it comes to Trump and these tariffs. You ready for this dark truth? This is not about goods and services. It's about spirits and people. 2019, 2020 was just a test run. 2025, we're going to watch everything collapse. And this collapse will be on purpose, just like how 2020 was. Not too long ago, they closed down the ports. Remember? What if I told you these ports and cargo represents us? The people that control this world look at us like we are just cargoes. And the reason why we have to pay taxes on the planet that God gave us is because God gave us a spirit and not a body. So as long as we have a body, it can be taxed. These people treat our bodies like it's a house. So we have to pay property taxes because we don't understand what's going on. We are dealing with the law of the water, not the law of the land. So don't be surprised if cargoes don't make it through the water. 2025 is number 9. 9 is the energy of the feminine principle. That's why when her water breaks, she pushes us through her hips. Just like how cargo is being pushed through the water. When she go in labor or pain, she pushes us through her water or her hips. The word hips is an anagram for ships. Everything is dealing with the goddess because she brings more life or cargo onto this planet. And the elites will always tax us because we are spirits that's living in a house or a body. It's not about merchandise or goods and services. It's about spirits that's being enslaved in a prison called the Matrix. When a woman gives birth, the first person the baby see is a doctor. The word doc is short for doctor. All boats or ships must come to the dock. 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 Before the goddess give birth, she goes in labor pain. In order to make money on this planet, we have to go to work, which is labor. Every time a new baby is being born into the system, it's a piece of cargo. That's why they get a social security number, birth certificate. They are trying to get us ready for the world or the Matrix. Yes, your child is just another cargo to the elites. And when a child comes out, later on in life, they say that baby have to get baptized to get saved. When you get money, you want to save it, right? So you have to get saved by the church. And if you want to make money, you got to save it. And when you do make money, you say, oh, thank you, God, for giving me money. You saved me. We are all baptized inside of the mother's womb. The people that control this world, they are really pirates. Skull and bones, pirates. They don't really want this chest of treasure. They want your heart because it's inside of a chest. Not this chest, but yes, this chest. For more information about this,
What's happening, my peeps? All right. So, are you excited or are you scared? Are you plugged in? Or are you listening to the fear mongering from the left and from Democrats? People are shaking in their shoes. And if you don't know what's really happening, it's understandable. So, I hope everyone had an opportunity to catch my last video about the triple threat, the 3 T's, Trump's tariff tsunami. We're seeing it. So Liberation Day. And guys, gals, peeps, don't get hung up on the tariffs. It's a means to an end. It's not, it's a buzzword. It's real, don't get me wrong. But it's a moment in time. It's a mechanism to accomplish Trump's goal of the golden age of America. Okay? So, the analogy of a tsunami is there's an event that happens in the ocean, like an earthquake, a seismic event, shifting of plates, and then that will, as it moves closer to land, it sucks all the water out. And then it builds pressure, builds power, and then before you know it, you're sitting there looking at a wall of water coming towards you, and there ain't nowhere to run. Because by the time you see that, you're not going to outrun it. So, Trump's tariffs that took effect on Liberation Day was a seismic event out in the ocean. And now, what are we seeing? We're seeing stock market, crypto, all these things are being sucked out to the ocean. And they're going to go out there, they're building power. And before you know it, we're going to be seeing a wall of water coming at us. And I'm hoping that that wall of water has RVs written on it, NESARA written on it, GESARA, because you're living history right now. You are in history, living it moment by moment, hour by hour, day by day, right now. And I've said this before, you're probably sick of me hearing it. We're living in history that people in the future are going to look back on us, you know, when we're older and wiser, and be like, what was it like when that happened? When the global shift in the economy happened? What was it like? And you'll be able to tell your tales. The other thing is people who were complicit, politicians, government officials, three-letter agencies that were complicit in what happened in 20 to 24 and leading up to 20 and some other past things. They were complicit in that. They had a hand in that. They were involved in that. Those people are shaking in their shoes right now. Why do you think all the fear porn and fear mongering is going on by the left, by politicians, and by rhinos? Because they know day reckoning is coming, and they're scared, and they should be. Penalty for treason is stiff, and it ends as a sudden snap at the end of a rope. So I think big things are getting ready to happen sooner than later. I think we are seeing retribution, Trump style, get ready to happen. And we know NESARA, there's, EBS, military steps in, there's, people are purple, rounded up, new elections, new government, all these things. It might be the tsunami that's coming. Are you ready? Have you done your homework? Are you plugged into what's really going on? Have you got all your I's dotted, T's crossed? You got your plan in action? Have you been studying crypto, blockchain technology, ISO 222, all the stuff that's getting ready to quantum shift in banking? It's at the doorstep, knocking. It's getting ready to happen. And I'm not here to say it's going to be Tuesday at 2, but it very well could be Tuesday at 2. I don't know. It's hard not to get excited right now when you're following the articles and you're seeing, Vietnam, big marker. Vietnam's coming to the table, and they're like, we don't want Orange Man's tariffs. What can we do? Well, revalue your currency, and all is well. We got Iraq. Oil prices are plummeting, and we all know that $65 a barrel marker. I think it's been surpassed. That's got me feeling kind of my spidey sense going off. We're hearing that budget tables are going to Parliament, that they're not going to delay it anymore. These are articles coming out of Iraq. Follow Brothers Technology on X, Twitter. Of course, Majid's very excitable. He's always out there looking for any disturbances in the force. Brothers Technology is a little bit more grounded. He brings you the article. He doesn't spoon feed you like Majid does. but there's meat on the bone there. These guys are great. I follow them. We've messaged back and forth, and they're solid. So stay plugged in, learn about blockchain, learn about crypto, get your RV plan ready. And my go back a couple videos, and I did Denarland 101. Some basic stuff that we've heard from, Mark Z and some different people that, it's just fundamental stuff. Get plugged in, learn, because, man, you very well may wake up in the next few days and see the green light that it's time to go do what we've been waiting to do for years, decades. Sometimes I envy people who are new to this just because they haven't been, enduring the roller coaster like the rest of us have. But get on the boards and share good stuff. Share common sense things. Don't get off on bunny trails and think you're going to be beamed up to the mothership and have your aura analyzed to see if you're good enough to go on. All that's bullshit. Put that stuff out of your mind. But real stuff. Talk about what you need to do to open a bank account and apply that to the RV. So you're not going to have to give DNA and all that stuff. It's just, there's so much craziness out there. Stick to the facts, stick to the fundamentals, stick to the basics, and you'll be fine. But guys, it's hard not to get excited. I'm like low key, my wife is, she's up for a promotion and a transfer. And I feel like I'm riding two horses, because on one sense, we're getting excited about her next career move. But then on the other side, I'm thinking like this RV might just happen before that even happens. So life is pretty wild right now. We're getting ready to go celebrate our anniversary dinner. Have dinner to celebrate our anniversary. So a lot of stuff going on right now, and I hope you guys are excited. And I hope you guys are plugged in. I hope you guys have done your homework and you're aware of what's getting ready to happen. So hang in there. And like always, I appreciate your time watching these videos.
Moral moment. Those of us who are sane would just call it a complete waste of time. But didn't the leftist darlings love it?
Left or right, it's right or wrong. Let's get in good trouble. My friend, Madam President, I yield the floor.
The ineffective gimmick did nothing to improve the lives of anyone, let alone the standing of the Democratic Party. Yet The Guardian described it like this, their headline. After months of surrender, the Democrats have finally stood up to Trump. Thank you, Cory Booker. Really? I can guarantee Trump's care factor was 0, if not less. In between saving America, the world, and playing golf, he'd have hardly noticed. Except, of course, to take the mickey, no doubt. Yes, Corey might have made history with the longest Senate speech ever, but Trump is changing the future of not only Americans, but the world with significant actions and policies that will take up far more space when they write accounts of these times down the track. When will the Dems understand that stunts don't work? And that if they really want to serve their nation, they've got to start producing, I don't know, something of substance. Mind you, why would they? When the cheer squad says things like this in response.
And I want to emphasize what Cory Booker did over the last 24 hours may have changed the course of political history. I watched a lot of it.
No wonder nobody is having hard conversations. They are all completely deluded. Thanks for joining me. See you next week.
Emphatic yes. I think of it in sort of two ways. One, if you think of the way trade is supposed to work, you're supposed to export in order to import that, and then you get the benefit of trade. You get actually you do what you do best, I do what I do best, or I do what you do less best.
Right.
You export, we import, and we get the benefit. We both have higher standards of living. That's not really it's evolved to. It's evolved to now where you have a few countries, the United States being the biggest, that have an open capital system and an open trading system, and other countries have an industrial policy that is designed not to increase the standard of living of their citizens, but to gain wealth. So what they're trying to do is get wealth in order to get assets in the United States, in order to get technology, in order to get all these kind of things that make you wealthy. So I think of the kind of failure points as being, one, because this system doesn't work, we have this giant transfer of wealth from the United States overseas, and that is in the form of trade deficits. And the way the system is supposed to work, no one should have large trade deficits for long periods of time. Things can happen. You can do it. You could have trade deficits with one country, surplus with another. But the notion of a country having hundreds of billions of dollars of trade deficits every year is not how it's supposed to work. We now are to the point where our trade deficits, they calculate them at about $700 or $800 billion. If you did it the way you or I would do in a sensible way, you'd probably be at $1 trillion or $1.25 trillion. So that's a transfer of wealth from Americans overseas in return for current consumption. And it has nothing to do with economics. It's entirely the result of industrial policy of other people and our being defenseless. Donald Trump's essence is he says we're getting ripped off. Our workers are getting screwed. It's not because they're lazy or stupid. It's because we have a bad system that is hurting them, and it's destabilizing the country. And all of these are data points that kind of make that point. And once you realize that, you realize you have to do something, right? The purpose of the economy, first of all, obviously, is national security. But after that, it's to distribute resources and wealth so that most Americans live the best lives they can live. And we have lost that. We have just plain lost it. What we really need, I've evolved to, is balanced trade. We need a system that enforces kind of trade balance, not with countries, but globally. Countries shouldn't be able to be huge surplus countries year after year, like China, of course, being the worst example, but also Germany. Ireland is evolving to that. And there's a bunch of other countries we could talk about. Countries shouldn't be able to do that. And so you say, well, how do you achieve that? You really need to put in place, I would say, some kind of tariffs to offset this fundamental unfairness. You're not just offsetting their tariffs. Europe's 10% on autos, we're 2.5%. If Europe went to zero, we still wouldn't sell very many cars in Europe. We just wouldn't. Our companies basically make small trucks. They don't need them there. I mean, it's just there's a lot of reasons why that wouldn't happen. But what you need, you can't have countries have huge trade surpluses over long periods of time. You have to enforce, and you have to penalize countries that have surpluses all the time and let countries that have deficits all the time get back to balance. If you do that, you then get the benefits of trade.
If you take a system that's been in place for generations, which the current one has been, even if it doesn't work well, even if it hurts your country, changing it is still, or changing anything that's been in place a long time is still a major lift, and it has, turmoil that accompanies it. So can you just be more specific about what sort of turmoil you anticipate as this administration puts into place this new system?
First of all, I have complete confidence that the president will do what he said he's going to do, right? And unlike a lot of politicians, he ran on like real substance and big ideas, and this is probably the biggest of the ideas that he ran on. And I think he's going to follow through on his promises, because that's the most important thing. The worst case would be that he doesn't. So what you have to do is put in place tariffs, as I say, to offset not just tariffs. That's a tiny thing. I just keep going back to this point because it's so fundamental. The problem is not just foreign tariffs. That's a tiny part of the problem. But to offset this unfairness. So he has to put those tariffs in place. When you do that, I do not believe you'll have inflation, and we should talk about that in a systemic, fundamental way. But you will have people who have supply chains that are going to have to make adjustments. You've got some things that may go up in price for some period of time. All these kinds of things will have an impact on people in daily life. But I think it'll be short-termed. I call them disruptions. I think it'll be short-termed. I don't think it'll lead to systemic inflation. And I think that people say, well, what should a businessman do? And I say the smarter businessmen and businesswomen are going to figure it out, right? And they get paid a lot of money to do that. And they're going to say, here are the rules. Just on that point, I've had business people, really smart business people, when I would explain this problem, and they would say, Bob, it's the government's responsibility to set up the rules. I'll figure out a way to make money in the rules. That's my responsibility. But I shouldn't be doing this social stuff. That's not my job. My job is to make whatever widgets and to make them profitable and employ my people. And I think that's kind of an important point. It's President Trump's responsibility now. He's the president to set in place a system where these good results for our people will come out. And I think he will.
Of all the potential effects of changing our system to the one that you describe, it seems to me that inflation is, certainly as a political matter and an immediate matter, the scariest. First of all, it's really easy to measure. Second, it's obvious. I don't know, it's easy to measure. It's very obvious to people when the things they buy regularly become more expensive. So, I mean, I just want to linger on this for a second. To what extent are we going to see increased inflation because of this?
So Tucker, I think there's going to be disruption, and disruption is going to have some prices go up, but some won't. So let's think about inflation just the way we should think about it. One, inflation is a systemic thing. It's not like your shirt costs more. If your pants cost less, that's not inflation. That's just a more expensive shirt. So the question is whether it's going to systemically raise prices. A lot of people would say, including Milton Friedman, that's really a monetary phenomenon. It's basically monetary policy that's going to dictate whether everything goes up or everything goes down. And this is not going to change monetary policy necessarily. Now, someone might say, it's going to slow down the economy, thus we should lower interest rates. Someone else will say it's going to have inflation, thus we should raise interest rates. So it's kind of a conundrum for the Fed. But set that aside. The notion is that you will increase production in the United States. You will maintain consumption at about the same, and that will not be inflationary. If anything, it'll be deflationary. So that's our idea. There's a model that some economists use called the GTAP model, which, by the way, generally assumes you cannot get economic growth that you're a full capacity, industrial capacity, and full employment. So if you have a model like that, then that's going to show inflation. But I would suggest that the model is not predictive. And indeed, the St. Louis Fed made the statement a few years ago that the predictive quality of this model is 0.0%. So a lot of the economists are using a model that's unhelpful. But so the notion is you're going to increase production, and that will happen, and that is not going to be inflationary. The idea is that inflation is systemic, not individual prices, so you can't just stack stuff up. The other thing is, in the argument against inflation, is that we did it last time in a big way. All the same people said it would be inflationary, and we had no inflation, right? We had 1.3%, so we had no inflation. So they were proven wrong. And then the final thing I would say, if the notion that economists use, which is that trade barriers create inflation, and that's the basic notion that you're talking about on their side, why is it that China has deflation and not inflation? Why is it that the country with the most trade barriers actually has no inflation?
Why is it important to do this, to institute tariffs, to rethink trade?
I think you have to start.
name is Kirill Dmitriev, and he is in the U.S. for talks with senior U.S. officials from the Trump administration, also in Congress as well. And he went on Fox News to talk about the progress so far of these negotiations toward ending the proxy war in Ukraine.
The talks right now and how they're going.
I think President Trump administration has made tremendous progress. There was no dialogue with Russia in Biden administration for the last 3 years. There was no trying to understand Russian position. There was no really solutions that could have been successful. And what President Trump team has done, they understood what the solution space may be, and they achieved the first de-escalation ever in the conflict, which is stopping hits on energy infrastructure between Russia and Ukraine. So we are having good discussions. Our diplomatic people are also discussing possible outcomes, but there is no question that President Trump team not only stopped World War III from happening, but also had already achieved sizable progress on Ukraine resolution.
So he says two important things there. First of all, he says the Trump administration is doing what the Biden administration refused to do, which is talk. The Biden administration wouldn't even speak to Russia while fueling a massive proxy war in Ukraine against it. But then he says the Trump administration, in talking to Russia, has helped avoid World War III. And you might hear that and think, okay, he's exaggerating. He's doing that to flatter Trump. Well, guess what? There are people inside the Biden camp who thought the exact same thing as well. That's a takeaway from a new article in the New York Times called The Partnership, The Secret History of the War in Ukraine. It's based on interviews with dozens of officials from the U.S. and other NATO countries that were behind the proxy war in Ukraine. And there are many revelations in there, including this, talking about the Biden administration's decision to continually cross its own red lines and provide weapon systems to Ukraine that it previously had ruled out, and that includes HIMARS. So here, the Times quotes Celeste Wallander, who was under Biden, the Assistant Defense Secretary for International Security Affairs, and she quotes Mark Milley, General Mark Milley, the former chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and she says, Milley would always say, you've got a little Russian army fighting a big Russian army, and they're fighting the same way, and the Ukrainians will never win. But then she says, by contrast to Milley's argument, General Christopher Cavoli, who is the commander of forces in Europe, he argued that with HIMARS, this missile system, the Ukrainians can fight like we can, and that's how they will start to beat the Russians. So if we just give them our weapon systems, then Ukraine will be on our level, on the US's level, and then we can beat the Russians, okay? And then, listen to this. At the White House, Joe Biden and his advisors weighed that argument against fears that pushing the Russians would only lead Mr. Putin to panic and widen the war. When the generals requested HIMARS, one official recalled, the moment felt like, quote, standing on that line, wondering if you take a step forward, is World War III going to break out? And guess what? They took that step forward of authorizing these weapon systems to Ukraine, even though they were wondering, is this going to cause World War III? So they took steps that they were not sure could avoid World War III. They're willing to risk World War III just for their proxy war against Russia. And the New York Times goes on, the unthinkable had become real. The U.S. was now woven into the killing of Russian soldiers on sovereign Russian soil. Yes, that's right. The Biden administration took steps that made the U.S. part of a killing machine against Russians on Russian soil, because eventually, because the Biden administration kept crossing its own red lines, they were involved not just in attacking Russian forces on Ukrainian soil, but also Russian forces across the border inside of Russia. And here are some of the key takeaways from this piece, which the Times helpfully put together. A U.S. base in Wiesbaden, Germany, supplied the Ukrainians with the coordinates of Russian forces on their soil. So contrary to the widespread view that this was a war between Ukraine and Russia, this actually was a war between Russia against Ukraine and the U.S., with the U.S. choosing the targets for Ukraine from Germany nearby, from a U.S. base in Germany. So at a base in Germany, the U.S. was choosing which targets Ukraine would hit and then giving them to the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians would strike them. So basically, it was the U.S. running the war from behind the scenes. Here's another takeaway. The Biden administration kept moving its red lines. From the first, administration officials sought to lay down a red line. America was not fighting Russia. It was helping Ukraine. Still, they worried that steps taken to accomplish that might provoke Putin to attack NATO targets or perhaps make good on his nuclear threats. Even as the administration developed an ever greater tolerance of risk to help Ukraine meet the evolving threat, many of the most potentially provocative steps were taken in secret. So, yes, we're not fighting Russia. On the other hand, we're going to fight Russia, but just do it in secret and hope that nobody notices, including Russia, which, of course, Russia knew along that we were doing.
How people in 1970 lost weight.
Back when we were growing up, cereal was simple.
Yeah.
It had whole grains, real ingredients, but
in 2000, and here's an example of the U.S. moving its red lines. In 2002, the U.S. Navy was authorized to share targeting information for Ukrainian drone strikes on warships just beyond the territorial waters of Russian annexed Crimea. The CIA was allowed to support Ukrainian operations within Crimean waters. That fall, the spy agency covertly helped Ukrainian drones strike Russian warships in the port of Sevastopol. So the CIA, the New York Times now admits, of course, way after the fact, was involved in attacking Russian ships inside of Crimea, which Russia seized in 2014 after the U.S. backed a coup in Kyiv. So now we learn after the fact just a new aspect of how dangerous this was, that the CIA was being involved in targeting Russian ships. Here's more. In January 2024, U.S. and Ukrainian military officers in Wiesbaden in Germany jointly planned a campaign using coalition-supplied long-range missiles, along with Ukrainian drones, to attack about 100 Russian military targets across Crimea. The campaign, named Operation Lunar Hail, largely succeeded in forcing the Russians to pull equipment, facilities, and forces in Crimea back to the Russian mainland. So, Malcolm, let me bring you in here. Now, of course, I mean, we've been saying this all along. We've covered this endlessly here on the Jimmy Dore Show, as we have also at Gray Zone, that the U.S. was actively involved as a belligerent in this war. This idea that we were just helping the Ukrainians, giving them the equipment they needed, that was always a farce. We were running this war from behind the scenes. And now it takes a long time, but the New York Times comes out with a very long piece confirming it.
Well, I think you're failing to factor in one important aspect, which is that it's not just a matter of us supplying Ukraine with the weapons of war they need to wage this war, but we need to supervise closely what they're doing, because left to their own devices, they'll just sell them on the black market. They won't even attack Russia. So you're criticizing the CIA for just doing their due diligence by making sure that they actually use the weapons we give them instead of selling them, often winding up facing back against them, by a circuitous route. So I think that's what you need to factor in also, Aaron. I'm not to criticize.
So the CIA stands for fiscal responsibility, basically.
Fiscal responsibility. I mean, when your kid turns 15 and gets or 16 and gets their driver's license, you don't just throw them the keys and say, "Hey, knock yourself out." You want to drive with them, make sure they're going, driving properly and not, getting drunk and driving. You got to supervise.
Right.
And I think if that is, I'm joking, of course, but that is an actual lesson of the early parts of this war, which is that a lot of the weaponry that we provided to Ukraine was just sold off to enrich the, Ukrainian oligarchs. That's not your point, I know, but.
Here's another takeaway from the New York Times. Ultimately, the U.S. military and CIA were allowed to help with strikes into Russia. We were directly assisting, in fact, overseeing strikes, not just on Russian forces instead of Ukraine, but strikes into Russia. And, looking back on it now, Russia practiced restraint. Imagine if Russia had decided to hit back at the same U.S. forces that were helping Ukraine strike into Russia. It would have been the World War III that these officials feared. Russia thankfully restrained itself, but had they not, it would have been even more disastrous. And here's one of the key architects of this U.S. assistance policy of running the war from behind the scenes, General Christopher Cavoli. Watch him talk at a congressional hearing about the effectiveness of U.S.-backed missile strikes by Ukraine at Russian forces.
How effective have the long-range missiles that we've allowed Ukrainians to shoot into Russia, how effective has that been?
Very.
In all areas?
Yeah, they've been extremely effective, sir. I could go into this in private session, but the United States makes some very good weaponry, and it's the ones we've donated have been very, very effective. In closed session, I'd be happy to talk to you about a few of the things they've done with it.
Now, why is he so happy to go talk about this in closed session? Is because in public session, he doesn't want to admit that he's the one running the war from behind the scenes. He's the one telling Ukraine what to strike, which Russian forces to hit. And that has to be kept in secret away from the public, because if the public maybe knew that the U.S. was secretly running the war in Ukraine, they might have some feelings about it and might be objecting. And that's why he had to talk about it in closed session.
Well, I like that he said, he's asked, how effective have they been? And he says very. And then the senator asks for clarification, and he says extremely. So, I don't want to just leave it at very and let you draw your own conclusions. It's also extremely effective. But but what you were saying before about how the Russians and Putin have actually shown restraint, it seems like the waging of this war has been a steady process of pushing things as close as possible to World War III without getting over that. And those red lines that the Biden administration was establishing were also sort of red lines to see if, is this going to get to World War III? No? Okay, I guess we can get a little farther. And it's like, just how much can we enrich our military contractor donors without us all, without bringing about the extinction of humanity. And, I think credit to them. They've done a pretty good job, Aaron. But the other thing is that the talking points about Putin are always that he's a madman. He's this crazed Putin. He can't be right. He's the only sane one who has prevented this from becoming World War III.
That's correct.
We've been depending on Putin, not being the way we describe him to the American people.
That's exactly right. While claiming that Putin is a madman, wants to take over Europe or the rest of the world, they've been relying on him to be restrained. Because as this article in the New York Times points out, it's not Russia that kept crossing its own red lines. It was the U.S. that kept crossing its own red lines. We heard so much about Putin's red lines and how he hasn't enforced them, so therefore it's okay to keep sending weapons to Ukraine. Putin actually didn't set out red lines. The U.S. set out red lines, and one of the red lines for Biden was we don't want to fight Russia directly, but they kept threatening it by moving over their own red lines, including because Biden initially said, we're not going to give Ukraine weapons that can strike into Russia. We're not going to give them these long-range weapons. He crossed that every single time because he was so desperate to keep the proxy war going. And why? We know now. They all admitted it was not even to help Ukraine. It was to weaken Russia. And so to weaken Russia, the Biden administration was willing to not only sacrifice Ukraine, but risk World War III. And 3 years later, the New York Times finally comes out and admits it, thereby catching up with those of us who've been saying this from the very start.
I know the New York Times reporters, one of their key sources is Jimmy Dore show 3 years ago. So they just watch old episodes and they're like, oh, this is interesting. We should write about this.
Come see us on tour in Cohoes, New York, Los Angeles, Bakersfield, San Jose, Buffalo.